Hey guys, Chris here. Tonight we have a story about two hikers that go in the forest looking for an abandoned rock quarry. And there they have a series of strange and frightening events that they ignore until it's too late. That's next. Okay, I am in my backyard base camp again tonight. This time I got my fire pit right here working for me. It's a beautiful night out. We got crickets, stars, and again the fire pit. $265 at the grocery outlet. Pretty awesome. And for tonight's beer, we have from the Mason Ale Works, Dankenstein's Monster. Check that out. And that is a double IPA, a terrifyingly tasty double India Pale Ale is what it says. So, and that is a kind of a big beer tonight. Wow. So there we go. Look at that. All right, cheers. That is tasty. Just in time for Halloween coming up next month too. Dankenstein's Monster. Okay, so tonight's story comes to us from one of our viewers. His name is Steve. And Steve, in the 90s, lived in Montgomery County, Maryland. He was about 25 at the time. And he and his friend Rick had heard about an abandoned rock quarry in the forest just outside of their town. They wanted to find it. Apparently this rock quarry was in the middle of this forest, surrounded by 2/3 of the sides with these really steep cliffs, 50 to 80 feet tall. This thing was rumored to be close to 200 feet deep. It was abandoned, totally overgrown around it, illegal to swim there, illegal to jump off the cliffs in the 90s. And there was private property at the southern end, which is where the approach was, where you could actually get to the shore. Otherwise it was just cliffs all the way around. And they thought it would be really cool to see if they could go in the forest and find this. It was also known that many people had died in this rock quarry by jumping off the cliffs and not landing correctly and then never emerging back from the water, just drowning, going right to the bottom. Very scary. Many people died there over the years. This quarry started in 1900 and went to about 1930 before they shut her down, and then it just filled up with water and became like this local swimming hole that was really hard to find. So Steve and Rick found the rock quarry on a map. It was called the Dickerson Quarry. I'm guessing the map was a topo map. They did not have handheld GPS back then. And they were really excited. They figured they could go to the railroad tracks and follow that for ways and then go into the forest and work their way back in there. They were really ready for an adventure. This story kind of reminds me of that movie, Stand By Me, written by Stephen King, about the four boys that go into the forest and they follow the railroad tracks and they're looking for a rumored dead body. You guys remember that movie? Just gives me that vibe. We have a sponsor today. It's Curiosity Stream. These are the best documentaries you can find anywhere. There's thousands of documentaries from the world's best filmmakers with award-winning and original documentary films. They are constantly adding new content every week of science, history, art, music, biography, and my favorite, nature. I've been watching the Bears of Katmai series. That's where filmmaker Casey Anderson goes to Katmai National Park in Alaska and films the coastal brown bears in the wild. It's quite an amazing series, and that park is 4 million acres. I've also watched Rock the Park and America's National Parks. It really makes it easy to expand my knowledge of the things that I love. There's definitely something for everyone. So go to curiositystream.com/basecampchris or scan this QR code for unlimited access to the world's best documentaries and nonfiction series. And for our fans, use promo code BasecampChris and you will save 25% off. So Rick and Steve pack the car with the gear they need for the day. They got their map and they drive to where this railroad tracks is and this access point, park the car, get out, follow the tracks for a while, go across this aqueduct, and now they've confronted with this really thick underbrush. It's August 1994. That time of year, the growth is really thick, real thorny, possible poison ivy, and they work through this undergrowth, and it took them about 45 minutes to get through that. They come out of the thick brush, and now they're at the edge of this cornfield. They can see a road just ahead, so they hike over to the road and start walking on the road. Now the cornfield is off to their right, and they're heading towards the forest. And then the cornfield ends and the forest begins over there as well. While they're walking, they're talking, they're kind of excited that they're making progress, and they're really excited to get to this rock quarry. Suddenly, in the corn, they hear some movement, some really loud movement, and it startles them. And this corn is about 4 feet high. It's August. And whatever this movement was, it moved straight ahead, a little bit to the right, into the forest, really quickly. And they thought, well, maybe that's a deer. About a minute later, in the forest, where this thing had gone, they heard this really loud screech, like a scream, this horrible high-pitched scream. And Steve mentioned that it sounded like a pig being slaughtered. And he said, I've never heard a pig being slaughtered, but he'd heard that phrase, but just this horrific sound. And it really startled both of them. But they weren't sure what to make of it, and they thought maybe it's some kind of a bird. They weren't sure what it was. So they continued on this dirt road. Now they're going into the forest on this road, and they know they got to get off the road and start cutting through the forest looking for this rock quarry. So they do that. They get off the road, they get into the forest, they start walking, and they hear this sound again, this loud scream. This time, it's straight to their right, pretty far that way. They stop, they listen, not sure what to think about it. They keep hiking. They hear it again. Now it's in a different direction, like it moved, like it's farther up this way now. They're not sure what to do with it. They keep going, they'll check in the map, and finally they get to this rock quarry, this lake, essentially, this beautiful blue-green lake surrounded by this overgrowth, with these towering 50 to 80 foot cliffs around 3/4 of it. They're just really excited that they finally made it, and they're right about ready to head down, and down below, where the water's edge can be reached, just off to the right down there, they hear this sound again, this scream, and it's right where they need to go. And Steve said, because we were mid-20s and we were stupid, we just went ahead and went down. We were excited to be at the quarry. So they did that. They worked their way down to the quarry, and this was really the only access point to get into the lake, was right about there, because the cliffs were just all around 3/4 of the lake. I'm going to call it a lake. And they sat down by the lake and just started talking, and Rick was kind of throwing some rocks in the water. Steve picked up a stick and started carving it. And they heard, on the other side of the quarry, near one of the cliffs, this really loud splash. The right side. They both looked up, looked over, and they could see the water kind of bubbling up and rippling out. And they were expecting somebody to emerge out of the water like they had just jumped off of a cliff. And they waited and waited, nothing. And they thought, that's kind of strange. And they thought, well, maybe a rock fell off the cliff and just fell right into the water. So again, they kind of ignore what's going on. They're sitting there, relaxing, talking, hanging out. Steve's still carving. They hear another loud splash. This time it's louder. And this time, the splash, this kerplunk splash, was in the middle of the quarry. And they knew it wasn't a fish or a beaver slapping his tail. It was way out there, and whoever or whatever they must have thrown a 20-pound rock out in the middle of this quarry. And they were both sitting there looking and seeing the water again bubble up, ripple out. Nobody pops out. Who could jump from a cliff 40, 50 yards out? And they thought, this is really weird. There's no person that can throw a rock that far out into a lake. And again, they didn't really acknowledge it, like, we better get out of here. They just said, okay. They didn't see anyone anywhere. And they're sitting there, and they're starting to feel a little unnerved now. And right about then, they felt like they were being watched. And they still thought it was people. And Steve thought, maybe it's the landowner. He's making a ruckus out here, and he wants to kind of scare us off. Really wasn't sure what to think about it, but they didn't know what else to think. But they both had this strange feeling of being watched. A few more minutes go by, and they hear another splash. This time it's up right side of the quarry, near the cliff. Good sized splash, they could hear it. They both look at each other and they see it. Not sure what to think. 2 more minutes goes by, and another one. This time it's closer. It's farther down on the right side along the cliffs. Rock splashes. Nobody comes out. There's nobody there. And they're feeling like, you know what, maybe we need to go, because whoever or whatever this is, they're moving our way. They're coming along the shore of this quarry, this lake. They decided to leave right then. They said, let's just get out of here. Let's hike out. Let's get out of here. Let's get back to the car. Yeah, let's do that, Rick said. They're climbing out, working their way up back to the edge of the quarry to get back to the forest. And behind them, right where they had been sitting, just a few feet into the water, a loud splash took place right there. And they looked back and they could see the water rippling and spreading out. They're like, oh my gosh, that we were just there moments ago. And they're like, yeah, let's get out of here. They get to the top, they turn, and they head into the forest. They go about 20, maybe 30 feet, and they hear over their left shoulder off to the side something coming really high through the tree branches and the leaves, and they can hear it come through and then land off to their left in the forest with this loud thud. It sounded like a 20-pound rock just came through the trees and landed. And they kept walking, and then 2 or 3 more rocks came through the treetops in various locations. You could hear it coming through and then landing even closer this time. Just very frightening, these large rocks coming through the treetops and almost hitting them. Steve stops and he starts scanning the forest and listening. Doesn't hear anything, doesn't see anything, and he's thinking it's still people. He still believes it's people, somebody messing with them. And he feels like he wants to confront them and say, you know what? We're leaving. You don't need to be throwing stuff at us. We're leaving, so just knock it off. And he felt really confident because they were both weightlifters at that time and into martial arts. So he felt comfortable that he could defend himself. And same with Rick. And they stood there looking into the forest, listening, and it was dead silent, nothing. And it was eerily quiet, more quiet than he'd ever heard the forest be before. He said it sounded like they were in a vacuum. It was just this airtight silence, really eerie. And suddenly, he felt this primal fear, is what he called it. A fear he'd never felt before, just overtake him, and almost this panic to get out of there. And he turns and he says, let's walk faster. And they started walking faster to get through the forest. And again, more rocks came through the treetops, this time landing right at their sides. Just almost hitting them, just right there. And then Steve says, what the hell is going on? And he just was so upset. And Rick said, just go, go, go. And they both started running, and they ran through the forest, not knowing what was happening behind them, if it was chasing them. They didn't hear footsteps. I asked Steve, and he said he couldn't hear footsteps, he couldn't hear talking, he couldn't hear anything besides these rocks. It was almost supernatural, like a paranormal experience. He didn't know what to relate it to. They're going through the forest, and there's kind of clearing, and there's this creek, a 12-foot wide creek. They got to get across this creek, and they're running. Steve's in front, Rick's in the back, and remember, there was a log that went across the creek that they came in on. They found it. Steve gets up on the log, Rick is right behind him, and they're trying to get across this log as quickly as possible. And once Steve is in the middle of the log, this large rock comes out of the trees and lands about 5 feet away from the log. And this log is about 4 feet up in the air above the creek. He got splashed by this rock. He got wet. Steve said it had to be the size of a paint bucket. And he meant a 5-gallon paint bucket. The splash was that big. They got to the end of the log, and they both jumped off, and they hit the ground running, not looking back, running straight through the forest to get out of there. Steve said he had never felt this fear before. He said that whatever was chasing him was beyond nature, and they might not live to tell about it. This was two cocky 25-year-old young men who were panicked. They kept running. They got out of the forest, hit the road following the cornfield, took a left, and went back into this thick underbrush. Stinging nettles, thorns, bushes, and Steve said they went straight through it, just diverting just enough to get through it as quickly as possible. He said it took them 3 to 4 minutes to get through there, whereas before it took them 45 minutes on their way in. They got over the aqueduct, ran down the tracks, got to the car. The adrenaline was still pumping. They're about to get in the car, and they both look at each other. And there's blood coming down their arms and their legs because of the brush. They were just happy to be out of there and back at the car. They both jumped in the car, turned it on, did a U-turn, and headed up the dirt road and got out of there. At that time, Steve didn't make the connection between the rock throwing, the screaming, and Bigfoot. He chalked it up to something supernatural. He just couldn't make sense of it. And then about 5 years later, he saw an episode of Mysterious Encounters. And on that episode, there was a family that had a very similar encounter in the forest. And it clicked with him. It made sense now that it had to be a Sasquatch or a Bigfoot. Then at this point, in the early 2000s, he contacted BFRO, Bigfoot Research Organization, and told them his story at the rock quarry, Montgomery County. They had a researcher contact him, and he told them that there had been other experiences at that time in that exact area. Nothing after that, nothing before that. And so the researcher and Steve theorized that there was a group of Sasquatch moving through the area at that time, and they just happened to encounter them when they were there. Steve told me that this happened almost 30 years ago, and that fear is still there, like it just happened yesterday. It's still a part of him. He said it was helpful to write it out, to talk about it a little bit, find my channel and see other people talking about their experiences, but it's still a part of his life from what happened to him in August of 1994 in Montgomery County, Maryland. And that is our story. Really appreciate that, Steve and his friend Rick. Thank you very much. I really appreciate you guys for watching my channel, having fun. This is fun with the fire pit. It's nice and toasty right over here. I love this. Really nice and toasty. I may do this in the winter when it's a lot colder, but it'd be fun. Maybe I'll have some hot chocolate or something. So thank you for watching. I really appreciate your comments. It's always inspiring, encouraging for me to get your comments as well. You guys are really a great community that we have here. I really appreciate that, and it makes me want to keep going. So I appreciate that. And I really am going to be trying to get other topics as well. We've talked about that, and I'm going to be branching out. I'm working with finding some stories and things like that, so that'll be awesome. But if you guys like stories about the strange, unexplained, that things that go bump in the night, you guys know what to do. Like, subscribe, comment, and all that fun. And thanks again for watching, and we will see you on the next one. As always, keep hiking.